Hey friends, it's Rabbi Jenny Solomon, and I'm here at Beth Myers Synagogue in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a mincha moment, a moment of pause this afternoon. So I'm thinking a lot this week about the quality of netzach for those who are counting the Omer, and for those of you who are just curious and learning about the process of counting the Omer. Each week is dedicated to a different midah, or a different sphira, a different pool of divine energy that exists out in the world and inside of each one of us, and gives us an opportunity to be more mindful, to grow in awareness, and to really cultivate this aspect of our souls. And this week we turn to the quality of netzach. And as with every midah, every sphira, there are so many different ways that we could translate netzach. One of my favorites for netzach is that it's like the metronome or the heartbeat of divine energy. So in our IJS practice, we're talking this week about netzach as energetic response. It's often translated as perseverance or endurance. It's about showing up again and again to the moment, to the work. And I have a different relationship to each midah. There are certain midot that are more challenging for me and others that are less challenging for me. This midah feels like the midah of my soul curriculum that comes really naturally, sometimes to a fault, in that I have the habit of persevering to such an extent that I have the tendency to power through things. And I've learned that this can be actually quite harmful in certain ways. It can really be a place in which my drive to push through, to impose my will on anything else that may be happening or may be true in my body or experience, and kind of override what the true divine call is in the moment. So this last, 5 years has been dedicated in many ways to unraveling and becoming more aware of that impulse within myself. And it is also one of my greatest strengths. And so I want to make a connection between netzach and another kind of embodied practice, yoga, because I know there are many of you out there that, like me, are yoga practitioners and just appreciate the practice. So even if you do not practice yoga, I hope you will find this metaphor or this connection useful. And this connection was really made first for me in terms of the Omer, by Rabbi Miriam Klotz, one of my great Torah teachers and Torah yoga teachers. But I also want to really acknowledge my two yoga teachers who also teach a lot of Torah, though I don't think they would call it Torah, Jill Sockman and Carrington Jackson here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So Jill and Carrington and Miriam, this is for you. So holding the pose, what does that mean? So in yoga, sometimes, depending on the moment, depending on the kind of yoga practice you may be flowing through, we're often invited to hold the pose. And it doesn't have to be a complicated pose. In fact, I think in some ways this can be most powerfully practiced in the simpler poses, simple, whatever that means. In poses that are not necessarily very physically demanding. But often we're invited by our guide, by our teacher, to hold the pose, to maintain that embodied shape for an extended period of time. That is the practice of netzach. Why is holding the pose instructive and even transformative? So I was thinking about it for myself. And the first is that it enables us to build strength, right? So if we're holding warrior pose, or we're even holding mountain pose, just a standing pose, we can engage all kinds of muscles and bones and alignment to build strength in our body, which we need to weather difficult times. So that's the first, building strength. The second is that when we give ourselves enough time just to hold the pose, my experience is that I find that emotions arise. So new feelings, new thoughts arise, and I have enough time to even allow that process to happen and to learn from that experience, to learn from what arises. I also find that when I can hold the pose, I have time to work on alignment. So I may notice, if I'm just flowing through a series of shapes in yoga, I'm more focused on getting from A to B to C, rather than noticing how my body feels in space. How are my bones aligning? How is my heart aligning with my bones and everything in between? So the last thing that I want to say about holding the pose is that I think holding the pose gives me sort of an imprint in my body. It creates an embodied memory that reminds me that I have a deep, deep well of strength, a deep well of endurance, of perseverance, of presence, and that is Netzach. And so that when I meet other moments in life where I want to shut down or escape or turn away or deny all the things that are natural to do when we encounter difficulty, my body remembers that I can hold this pose for longer than I thought. And I can keep showing up and creating space for what's happening here and now. So here's to a week of holding the pose, whatever that means for you, deepening our capacity to be with, to stay with the moment as we hold the pose, even as, and this is really a PSA for myself, even as we tend that part of ourselves that has a tendency to power through. So I think we can do both and. As with all things Jewish and spiritual, it's always both and. We can set an intention not to power through, even as we set an intention to build our capacity to endure. All right, friends, happy week of Netzach. Take good care. Shalom.